Thank you so much for joining me for this important conversation related to Christian ethics, specifically the church's response to justice and society as the church of the living God of this generation. I think that as we get started, it's so important that we recognize that we live in an age of unprecedented moral confusion. Public consensus on basic moral issues, the fruit of Christian influence on Western civilization, has been tragically eroded. As pragmatism and relativism reign supreme, we are really and truly living in the period when, just as in the days of Judges chapter 21, that everyone did what was right in their own eyes. In the midst of this fog, however, the Christian faith presents us with really a coherent worldview that provides straightforward direction on central ethical questions. And so, as we take a moment to unpack today's conversation, I believe it's important that we consider how the Christian ethic speaks to a number of hotly contested issues of our present time, our present generation. And so I suppose we must ask the question then, what are the defining principles of the Christian ethic? In other words, what does it really mean to hold a worldview related to Christianity and ethical decisions in the face of our current cultural climate? We immediately think of perhaps the two greatest commandments as expressed by the Lord in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37, that we are called to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, our soul, our mind, as well as to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. And so it is entirely true to say that the Christian ethic is love centered. But what does it mean in practice then to love God and love others? What does Christian love actually require of us? This is the critical question that we must answer. For us to return to God's moral laws, we must live these out in a more express manner as they are directly connected to his commands. And so, Christians, we've truly got to recognize this, that the Ten Commandments is God's set of ordinances. It was delivered by Moses on Mount Sinai, written on tablets of stone by the very finger of God. And it was to be a summary of the moral law. These commandments, which represented our fundamental duties toward God and our fellow human beings, are reaffirming as abiding moral principles found in the New Testament. And so I feel as though it's critical to recognize that even at Sinai, these divine commandments, well, they were far from innovative. They weren't ethical innovations of their time. No one should ever think as though idolatry, murder, adultery, theft were permissible before the Mosaic covenant. The Ten Commandments, they reflect what some theologians have called creation ordinances. Creation ordinances, the universal norms, moral norms that are grounded first and foremost in the character of God, and secondly, established in the nature of human beings and social relationships, as these are all originally created and ordered by God Himself. What this implies is that the Christian ethic is rooted in the biblical doctrines of God, creation, and humankind. God, creation, and humankind. In fact, once we see all the basic foundations are laid really in the opening chapters of Genesis, the majority of moral issues really do fall into place, even allowing us to challenge ethical decisions that we may occasionally face. For instance, the global biblical truths that we are to acknowledge should be as follows. They should be as follows: that God is sovereign. He is sovereign creator of all things. He is the ruler and speaks with absolute authority in all areas. There is, secondly, a natural order to creation. There's a natural order to creation that we as human beings ought to respect. Third, God made us. God made humanity in his image, in his own image. And so, because of that, we have a special worth, a dignity, so to speak. And we should seek to reflect the character of our Creator in all that we do. Next, God's design for humanity includes the basic sexual differential of male and female. We see this in the Genesis account, and we must acknowledge what is written in the Old Testament scrolls. God established the covenant of marriage for the purpose of companionship, for procreation, as well as for intimacy. And thus, human society is structured around the basic family unit: one man, one woman, united in marriage, raising children, if God so blesses, really to form new families and new family units. Next, God really initiated the human race with a single family, establishing the fundamental unity and solidarity of all humanity. It's with these creation principles that the Christian ethic is really in view. And so let's consider then how these core principles in the Genesis account, how they provide clear moral direction on hotly disputed issues such as abortion or euthanasia, racism, capital punishment, divorce, homosexuality, transgenderism. What we need to first and foremost do is consider the doctrine of the image of God, the Imago Dei, and really its ethical implications. You see, all of life, we know this, all of life is really a gift from God, who alone has life in himself. God is the author of life, and thus he has all authority to give life and to take it away. This is true of all living creatures. But the fact that humans are special, we're created in this image of God, this Imago Dei, that means that our lives are valuable. They're precious in the sight of the Lord. So cursing someone made in the image of God, well, it's nothing short of an offense against God himself, James chapter 3 and 9. Therefore, we have a moral duty to honor, to protect human life from beginning to end. Now, modern science confirms what the Bible has already implied. A human being, a new human being, comes into existence at the point of conception. A child in the womb, even at the earliest stages of development, bears God's image no less than a newborn baby or even a full grown adult. Abortion, therefore, is really the destruction of a defenseless human being, and is grievous. It's hurtful in the sight of God. And so this must be the baseline for Christian thinking about abortion, even as we wrestle with tragic situations, fetal abnormalities, or even perhaps pregnancy through rape, difficulties that this might occur. But the sanctity of life, I believe, applies in this manner. Sanctity of life applies to not only the issues related to abortion, but it also applies equally to end of life issues. Euthanasia, it's a technical term for mercy killing. It's taking the human life to avoid some sort of suffering, to curtail suffering. And so controversy occurs today on the practice, for instance, of physician assisted suicide. This is where the doctor is enlisted to help patients painlessly end their lives. And so, consistent with its pro life ethics, scripture always portrays suicide, literally self killing, in negative terms, right? And while the Bible has much to say about enduring suffering, it never sanctions suicide as a solution. Thus, while we should fully support compassionate palliative care, pain management, euthanasia, it must be viewed as morally wrong by biblical standards. Next, another hot topic, so to speak, would be an issue that we have faced or are facing even right now in our nation: racism. Racism has brought tremendous suffering and division to human societies, really over the course of history. This is an issue to which Christian ethic that we must speak clearly upon. We must speak forcefully upon sometimes. We've noted how the biblical creation account underscores the foundational unity of all humanity. We all come from Adam and Eve. We all come from the same gene pool. Strictly speaking, there then is only one race, and that is the human race. And so, by God's design, it has flowered into a wonderful diversity of ethnicities. Furthermore, the Imago Dei doesn't come in degrees. Every human being born, we all equally bear God's image. Thus, we should all enjoy the same dignity, worth, and protection under God's law. Even secular historians recognize modern concepts of civil rights and how it has its roots in theology and really anthropology of the Christian worldview. So, uh, one interesting piece, caveat would be support for capital punishment is often portrayed contrary to pro life convictions, but it has no less grounding than when we look to scripture, because every person, again, is created in the image of God. Now, one theologian positioned it this way: biblical rationale is explicit precisely because God has made us in his image. This individual that I read, he believes that murderers should actually forfeit their own lives and as a just penalty for taking someone's life. Now, at the same time, the sanctity of life is on the spectrum as well, and I personally have a different view than this ethicist. I do believe that all life is sacred. And if I'm not willing to do something to end someone else's life, why should I put someone else in that position? But again, this is something that we can wrestle with as apostolic Pentecostals today, to that we can approach this from a biblical worldview and really land in two camps when it comes to capital punishment. However, as the ethicist mentioned in the reading that I had, the reason why capital punishment should be enforced is so that justice is upheld in our legal systems, and that's why we are able to punish for capital types of crimes. Christian ordinances, they need to be also applied to areas of marriage, areas of sexuality, contemporary issues such as divorce in the United States today. For instance, you know, two out of every five marriages end in divorce. And so this notion of no fault divorce is widely accepted in many circles. How, for instance, if a husband and wife just simply decide they're no longer compatible, decide they're no longer in love, that is considered sufficient justification to abandon the marriage. Yet when Jesus was directly questioned about divorce and remarriage, he pointed back to the divine institution of marriage in Genesis chapter 2 and 24. And he was emphasizing that when a man and a woman enter into a marriage covenant, they are joined together by the Lord in a profound one flesh union. Matthew chapter 19. Only marital infidelity or willful desertion that violates the one flesh union then can justify dissolving this solemn bond. Matthew chapter 5, Matthew chapter 19, 1 Corinthians chapter 7 speak to these issues, while same sex relationships have been aggressively normalized in Western society. The biblical teaching on this matter is unmistakable, just as it's clear what Jesus was talking about when he was talking about divorce. That there's really only a few grounds for that to be a biblical grounds for divorce and then potentially remarriage. There's really only a few reasons why we would even consider these ethical questions to come to surface. But when it comes to same-sex relationships, the Bible teaching on this is really clear. The creation account is clear that marriage was ordained by God as a bond between one man and one woman, and this was to serve as the foundation for family and society. By God's design, Eve was made fit for Adam, not merely in a sexual manner, but really as a companion. Genesis chapter 2 and 18 speak to this. And so scripture and nature together attest that a same sex couple cannot form a one flesh union, nor can they be fruitful and multiply, according to the Genesis account of chapter 1 and verse 28. Even if there were no explicit condemnation toward homosexuality in the Bible, even though we understand that the Bible does speak specifically about it, saying it is an abomination, the matter would be settled decisively by the biblical creation account and echoed in the teachings of Jesus. And so this principle would also apply to transgenderism. Christians should be compassionate toward those who may suffer from dysphoria about their identity, about their bodies, unsure about what that looks like. Nevertheless, God's plan for human sexuality, it's very clear. All of us, you and me, we are all made in the image of God, male and female. Our bodies then are primary indicators of which we are. Either we are male or either we are female. There is no gender confusion. There simply is no basis in Scripture for a category of gender identity that is independent from our embodied sexuality. Much more could be perhaps said about this. Perhaps some of the other ethical challenges that are out there today. Even so, really, the core principles of the Christian ethic, they're clearly revealed in Scripture. They're deeply rooted in the doctrine of God, in the doctrine of creation, humanity, humankind, and these foundations really are almost entirely laid out in these first two chapters of Genesis. If we just take a moment to unpack what Scripture shares, we will have the opportunity to really establish a Christian ethic in the face of social questions, in the face of a culture that more and more walks away potentially from morals that have been established in the Bible, in the Genesis account, and lived out all throughout the Old Testament and even the New Testament, and even in our present day culture. And so I would say be prayerful, but yet look to Scripture. Understandably so, we must love God, we must love others as self, and yet at the same time, we must be obedient to God's ordinances and certainly obedient to what Scripture shares on these relevant and important matters of the church. Thank you so much for joining me on this important conversation about Christian ethics related to some of these hot button topics that we will face or are currently facing in our world and our society today. I will pray that God will give you peace and clarity as you too wrestle with these important topics. God bless.